I'm the COO of the company. We have some good educators that are going to be joining us or are joining us today, so welcome to them. We're going to first start with our needs and wants. Any buyers and seller needs and wants that you guys want to discuss and talk about? Nothing going on?
Steve, I have something. I'm with Edge Homes, so this is Jack.
Hey,
How are you?
Good.
So hi guys, I have lots of developments. So we released for sale yesterday a sixplex townhome building at the Exchange. We have an additional cancellation that came available. These are estimated completion right around Thanksgiving, in between Halloween and Thanksgiving. If anybody is interested, you can submit an intent to contract on those units prior to 5:00 p.m. today. And I can text you all the information that you need on that. I also have a building of townhomes in Lakefront and two cancellations, one that will be complete late this month into early March. And you can submit an intent to contract on any of those units prior to 5:00 p.m. today. Then I have a condo building at Lakefront in Vineyard. There are 10 units in that building. Same drill, intent to contract before 5:00 p.m. If you have any needs or you need any details on that, just reach out to me and I can send you all the info. Then single family, I have 2 lots at Quail Hill that are roughly 1/3 acre. That's in northwest Saratoga Springs. About 3 minutes from Costco, 4 minutes from the upcoming LDS Temple. And then I have 13 lots at Mountain Ridge in a fantastic community. This community is right on the border of Harriman and Riverton. 90 seconds south of the future Costco, 30 seconds south of brand new Mountain View Village with the Harmons there, the future 14-plex Cinemark. Easy access to Bangor and I-15 and all of that. Absolutely fantastic location surrounded by great schools. 6 lots, the last 6 lots up in Hidden Canyon Estates in Draper. And for any of the single family stuff, I would need an intent to contract form prior to 5:00 p.m. tomorrow. So reach out to me if you need any details on any of that, and I'm happy to help you any way I can.
All right, thanks, Jack. Anybody else have anything?
I do. I have clients who are looking for a single family home up to 350, which I know everyone's looking for that, anywhere from Lehigh to Layton. And they don't want to do a condo or townhome. They want a single family home with a small backyard. They only need 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, but they'd rather have something that's not in terrible condition. They're not really fixer-upper kind of people. So we've looked at a few things, but if you have anything coming up, if you could let me know, I'd appreciate it.
Cool, thanks, Angela. Keep an eye on our family Facebook page too. We post our in-house things there. Anybody else? Okay, all right, let's move on to our broker moment. Our broker moment is talking about dual agency. We have a discouraging policy here at Presidio where we discourage it. And the reason why is because in my 21 years of doing real estate, the only E&O claims that I've been a part of, which I know of 3 or 4, which weren't mine, but as the broker, have all been on because of dual agency and somebody feeling like they weren't treated fairly. So we do discourage it. An alternative to doing dual agency is using the unrepresented buyer. It works out well. You still get both sides of the commission, or you can discount your commission with your listing. It's up to you, but however, you still end up taking care of the paperwork because you want the paperwork done right. But the unrepresented buyer document is a good workaround for that. Any questions on that or thoughts? Nope. Okay, then we will keep moving on. All right, upcoming education classes. Here it is, right here on your screen. So take a look at that. Our normal 4 days a week education and CE that we do. We do the champions training on Monday, raising the bar training with Stephen Pressberry on Tuesday, and then sales meeting, and also Thursday we get pre-CE day as well. So Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week are all CE hours. So that's 7 hours right there. So that's what's coming up next week. Okay, congratulations to our weekly closers from February 10th through the 16th. So we know transactions are still happening out there. Congratulations, we had 19 closers last week. So yay, give them a round of applause. All right, and as we are cruising along, let's go to our affiliates. Jack's already talked, so let's talk with Amy from White Knight.
Thank you, Amy from White Knight Insurance Solutions. I want to focus this week on replacement cost on either your home, your personal home, your family, or your clients. This is much different than market value. Replacement cost is what it would actually take if your house was completely burnt to the ground, what it would take to rebuild it. And as you know, COVID has affected many things, and it also has affected the cost of raw materials. That has increased. Some materials have increased up to 107%. So what does this mean? Your house, friends, family, clients could be underinsured. So our suggestion to you is to review your insurance. If you want us to review it, we're happy to do it. It's at no cost. We offer that free to you. We just want to make sure that your home, with everything increasing, is insured correctly. And the great thing is White Knight right now is doing a drawing. If you send in a quote or a referral, you'll be entered into our drawing for a 50-inch smart TV. And we're capping that at 25. So that's a 1 in 25 chance. Plus you have a review on your insurance to make sure your family's protected. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Patrick Murphy from Home Warranty of America.
Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it. I often refer myself to well, let me rephrase that. I often tell my agents that I work with that I'm working when you're working. And this was never more evident than Sunday morning when I got a call from a homeowner telling me that his water heater had broken and he needed to file a claim. So I walked him through that process and kind of told him that there's probably not going to be a contractor that's going to work on a Sunday, and tomorrow's President's Day. So let's talk about, doing a buyout option so he could find his own contractor, because I didn't think we would have one available for him. So he called around, talked to Any Hour, talked to a couple places. They weren't even working until Tuesday. So I told him, well, let's just have you file a claim, get it on record. Then when you find your contractor, will be easier to, buy you out, pay him for his reimburse him for his expense. And so he called the claim in, got claims right away. It was assigned to a local contractor, and they came out the very next day. They came out on President's Day, Monday morning at 9:30, and replaced his water heater. So anyway, that's kind of like what I've seen. I have a 95% claim approval rate. Caps are high. So if you're thinking about a home warranty for your clients to protect them and yourself against errors and omissions, think of HWA. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Pat. Okay, so Jack from Edge, he put in some links. All right, somebody needs to mute themselves. Getting feedback. All right. Okay. So Jack put in a link for you guys to check out for the different things he was talking about. Jenny, I want to answer your question. Is this the flip-flop class? I'm not sure what you mean by flip-flop class. I do know that Jack's Petty does teach on seller finance, and pretty much I know that's going to be the class. So I don't know which class you're referring to. You want to unmute?
Hey, Steve, this is Sherry with Stewart Title. We
Hey,
are
Sherry.
teaching a class today on flip-flops and assignments.
Oh, okay, that's what it means. So yes, Jenny, Sherry's going to be teaching today on flip-flops. Thank you for covering that. Okay, I want you to know that staff is probably going to be pretty limited in our offices today because of this snowstorm. We're getting hit pretty good here in Harriman, so I'm not going anywhere today. Just be safe, be careful out there, be smart. I couldn't talk my wife out of going to work, but she's got a nice truck and went 4-wheel driving. She thought it was a blast, except that she only got to go 20 miles an hour the whole way because there's so many people out there. So be careful, stay home if you can, you know, unless you're just dying to get out there and show houses today in this crazy stuff like Jen is. I know she's up in Park City doing that very thing. So be careful out there, okay? All right, we are going to turn the rest of the time over to, it says Jill Chandler and Sherry Holmes from Stewart Title. And take it away, Sherry.
Great, thanks, Steve. Welcome to our class, you guys. I'm Sherry Holmes with Stewart Title. I do marketing here in the Salt Lake area, so thanks for attending. We did invite Security Home Mortgage in, Mike and Mark. Do you guys want to take a few minutes and introduce yourself before we get started with our part of it?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having us. So this is Mark, I'm Mike. Just wanted to talk about something. I know we're in a very competitive market. I don't need to tell you guys that, but one of the things that we do here at Security Home Mortgage that could be of value as you go out and you're competing, you know, with other buyers, you know, to get into a property, is we do a 21-day close on we can do a 21-day close on most of our the clients that we work with. Not everybody, but most of them. The benefit there, obviously, you get in and you're competing with other offers, and if there's one thing that sets you apart, somebody wants to get out of their house quickly. You know, in many cases, they're selling their house that just went under contract because they're trying to buy another house, and sometimes they've got a short fuse on getting out of their house. So that would be a benefit that we could bring to you in our 21-day close. If you do have somebody or a situation that might be a benefit, you know, let us know. As we go through that pre-approval, I can easily tell you, yes, this would be a good candidate for a 21-day close, and that way you can have that little edge up. So that's it, just that simple. That's all we wanted to share. And if you have any questions about that, let us know.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate you jumping on the call this morning. Well, we are going to teach a new class. We just got licensed flip-flops and assignments. So Mark Chandler's our instructor, also our attorney for our company and a part owner. He also does 1031 exchanges, probate. So he's a great resource for you guys and for our clients. So please feel free to ask any questions during the class. We don't really kind of follow a strict guideline, so it's open for discussion, and we do encourage you guys to unmute and definitely comment on what he's talking about. So Mark, are you ready to get started? I know we're a little bit late for it being an hour class, but.
Yep, I am ready.
Okay, perfect.
So let's clarify that. On your agenda, it said that it was a 2-hour class. This is actually a 1-hour class. Hope that's okay with everybody. But it might seem like 2 hours. So that would sort of even it out. So, hey, through the class, I'm going to hold up 4 letters. This is the way that we guarantee that you stick with us through the whole class. At the end of the class, you'll email those 4 letters to Sherry, and that's the way we confirm your attendance. And
this is a CE class then?
Pardon me?
This is a CE class?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that. So then we do have other rules that we do have to follow. Like if you want CE credit, you have to turn your camera on the whole time, as well as turn in the required words.
And I will put your email in the chat at the end, Sherry, so they know where to send their name, their license number, and the letters that you require.
Perfect. Thanks, Leslie. I can chat up to you right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's 1 hour core. So, okay. Any other questions before we get started? Let me introduce this class a little bit. And I can see everybody very clearly, so I can see the raise of hands. Who is familiar with the practice of wholesaling? And that's most hands. So thumbs up, thumbs down, had a good experience, a bad experience. You could even do it sideways if you want. So Brandon did kind of a sideways wave. Yeah, it's hot and heavy out there right now. And I got a call from a broker who wanted to talk about wholesaling, and that whole topic is about flips and assignments, and specifically wanted to know something about the duties that agents had. And so that conversation led to a new class, and it's been interesting to see people's experiences with investors and flippers, and kind of acquaint you with some of the forms that most people are not familiar with. And so UAR's got 3 forms that we're going to visit. Forms 28, well, actually 28 and 28A. 28A is not an actual form. It's a scenario. And 28 is an assignment of new construction. And 29 is assignment of existing residential. And 30 is a simultaneous closing addendum. So while we're showing raised hands, who's familiar with those forms? Does anybody use those forms? Yeah, so that's kind of been my experience. Most people don't even know that these forms exist. So maybe we'll learn something today. So now let me get a little terminology in place. So I think most people know what a flip is, right? A flip is a purchase of a property with the intention of rehabbing it and then reselling it. It's happened for years and years and years. I think most people are familiar with what a flip is. There are 2 kinds of flips. There is a delayed flip, and a simultaneous flip. Most people are familiar with a delayed flip. The delayed flip is a purchase, at point A, and then a rehab, and then a sell at point B with some lapse in between there. A simultaneous flip is a flip where you've got a seller selling to a buyer number 1, we'll call that buyer number 1, and then buyer number 1 becomes a seller and flips the property to buyer number 2 simultaneously. And there are various reasons. It's kind of rare. You don't see it a lot, but you used to see it more. And so there are actually some pretty strict rules that title companies have on how to close that transaction, and things that really cannot be done. And a little later, we're going to talk about that. So just that's what flips are. Now, assignments are a different animal. And with an assignment, you've got a seller and a buyer, and the buyer assigns the property to a new buyer. And so I'm going to use the word, Sherry, go ahead and laugh at it. This person is called the assignor, and this person is called the assignee. Assignor, assignee. And I'll refer to the assignor and the assignee. And why is everybody laughing at that? Brandon, you find that humorous?
Well, I pronounce it a little bit differently, but that's okay.
Well, you'd say, what would you say? Assigner, assignee?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, tomato, in legal terms, lawyers refer to it as the assignor and the assignee. So, not to be confused with something that is asinine. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit today as well. So, and I find a lot of agents, because of what the REPSI says, are under the impression that you cannot assign a contract. You can. And so has anybody, show of hands again, has anybody ever worked with an assignment of a contract or seen an assignment? Okay, so there's a few of you, so that you know that it can be done, because there are agents who think that you cannot do it. So let me give you a little background on assignments of contracts. So, and here's our first letter. First letter of the day. Everybody see it?
H.
That is the letter H. So, really broadly speaking, there are two types of contracts: real estate contracts and personal services contracts. So real estate, is a real property, and personal services contracts. Under the law, real estate contracts are assignable. So the general rule is these are assignable and these are not assignable. And the reason why personal services contracts are not assignable is because the party who has been contracted to provide the service is chosen due to their skill and their knowledge and their experience. So they are specifically chosen to provide that service. And it would be inappropriate for them to assign their rights under the contract to a third party that the other party, contracting party, had not chosen and might not have equivalent skills and knowledge and experience. So personal services contracts, not assignable. Real estate contracts are assignable. And when you assign a real estate contract, what you are assigning is, by you, I mean you are the assignee, you are assigning your right to equitable title in the property. So I don't know if you've heard of the term equitable title, but let me explain what equitable title is. So once a buyer puts a property under contract, the buyer actually acquires a legally recognized right to that property, and it's called equitable title. Now, equitable title is limited, right? It's not the equivalent of a fee simple title. So just because I put the property under contract doesn't mean I get to go there for the holidays and I get to invite people there for a picnic, right? Because I've got to convert my equitable interest into a fee interest by performing on the contract, right? I've got to pay for the property. Then I acquire the fee. But this equitable interest has certain characteristics, and it's recognized as having certain characteristics. There is a provision in your REPC. I want to say it's number 24. I don't have it sitting in front of me. It's the risk of loss section. Does anybody know what the risk of loss off the top of your head? Anybody know what the risk of loss section says?
Oh, I had a question, not about risk of loss, but I wanted to know why would a buyer assign a contract? Is there a benefit? Do they usually charge extra or something? I was confused by that.
Let me make this very clear. It's money, money, money. These contracts that these wholesalers are putting properties under contract, and they are assigning their contractual interests for tens of thousands of dollars. So $65,000, $75,000, $80,000 is not unusual to see as an assignment fee on these contracts. And we'll kind of flesh that out, but it's all about money. There could be some other circumstances involved, but in the world of wholesaling, it's all about the money that people are getting for these properties. Jenny, does that answer your question? Is that succinct enough? Hello? Yeah, so let me give you an example. I know of a little house up in Ogden, up on Jefferson Avenue, little 2-bedroom house, pretty beat up, right? It really needs to be rehabbed. and it got purchased for 90,000. So the investor put it under contract for 90,000, and then sold the contract for 160. So, you know, in the matter of a few weeks, the investor made 70 grand and never actually bought the property. So it's a very lucrative business, can be a very lucrative business, and it's highly competitive, and can be a little bit ruthless, and I'll talk about some of those practices. But that risk of loss section in the REPC says that, and you'd think that maybe this would be common sense, but it's not. What the REPC says is that the risk of loss on the property belongs to the seller, or to the seller. And so that if the property is destroyed or damaged in any way, shape, or form, the seller assumes the risk of that loss to the property. Therefore, it's incumbent on the seller to keep the property insured. So it's the obligation of the seller to keep the property insured. Well, you would think that that would be the case at every time, but it's not. Under the law of equitable title, the person with equitable title bears the risk of loss. So without that section in your REPC, if the property was damaged, the buyer would have the obligation to repair the property or to take title to the property in its damaged condition. And that would not be an excuse for non-performance by the buyer. So that's why that risk of loss section is in the REPC, to kind of undo what the common law for real estate contracts and equitable title does. Now, the other thing that another characteristic of equitable title is that it can be sold. It's an interest in property that can be sold. And so with an assignment, like I had mentioned, what the buyer is doing is essentially selling their equitable interest in the property. And that's what allows a real estate contract to be assigned and not a personal services contract. Now, who lived during we all lived. Who was practicing real estate back at the height of the market in 2005, 2006? There was a lot of assigning going on back then. And much of what was being assigned was new construction. And so investors were coming from different parts of the country, coming into Utah, and they were buying up all of the new construction, not all of it, but a great deal of new construction. They were putting it under contract. And then they were taking advantage of the appreciation, the rapid appreciation of new construction, and they were assigning their contracts for big bucks. And there was a lot of this going on. It was depending on the builder, some people just didn't like it. Some builders didn't like it, and they tried to stop that. They would advertise, "We are not selling to investors," or they would put clauses in the warranty deeds that would limit the ability of a buyer to flip the property within a certain number of years. And they would also make the buyer of the property agree that if they did flip the property within 2 years or 3 years, they had to share a portion of the profits with the builder. And they did that to kind of discourage the flipping of their properties. And so with an assignment, you always get kind of a set of questions, right? So if I've got a seller, buyer number one, buyer number two. The questions that are raised are what kind of disclosures need to be given. So if I'm buyer number one and I'm assigning to buyer number two, do I have to disclose to the seller what I'm assigning for, what my assignment fee is. And if I'm buyer number one, what kind of disclosures do I have to give to buyer number two? Do I have to make it clear that I'm not really, I don't own the property, so that I'm not really selling that person a property. I'm not taking the place as a proxy to the seller. You know, I'm just a buyer on a property. And so there were a lot of questions, a lot of issues with assignments. And so the Division of Real Estate just said, hey, let's change the REPC and make the REPC non-assignable. And so the REPC in its current form is not assignable. Not assignable. Except for two conditions, two circumstances under which the REPC can be assigned. Does anybody know what they are? When can you have an assignment of the REPC?
If you've got an agreeable seller, then you can do an addendum and make it assignable.
Right. So consent of the seller. Right. So consent of the seller. And that's what that form number 29 is. It's an assignment of the REPC. Another letter. Hey, I'm doing another letter, folks. So wake up. Wake up. Here's the letter. Everybody see it? Yeah, so consent of the seller. And if I have consent of the seller, I'm having the seller sign an addendum, and the addendum is going to disclose all of that information to the seller. So the seller will know what the assignment fee is and who the assignee is. So all that disclosure will be done. And what's the second one? Does anybody know what the second one is? So consent of the seller, you can assign. What's the second one?
Is it if they're moving it into a trust or it's
Yeah.
part of a trust?
Yeah. Who is that?
That's Cindy Poole.
Extra point, Cindy.
Woohoo! I know, I'm a newbie too.
Oh, yeah. Well, extra points. So consent and transfer into an entity. So if the buyer is a principal of an entity, not just any entity, an entity in which the buyer is a principal. So a trust or an LLC or a partnership. We don't like partnerships, so let's not say that. Corporation or an LLC. So you can have an assignment of the seller in a scenario like that. So, and now we used to use, got a lot of experienced people in here. We used to always use this language on the REPC. We would name the buyer, and then we would say and or assigns, right? Many contracts would have that language, the name of the buyer, and then it would say and or assigns. What does that mean? Or what did that mean? Manifested the intention of the seller or of the buyer to retain the ability to assign the contract without consent of the seller. So the thinking was, if I put and or assigns in there, I've put the seller on notice that I'm going to assign this contract, and the seller couldn't say anything about it. Well, we don't use that language anymore very often. Somebody mentioned it the other day. They wanted some, in a specific circumstance, they had a builder client who wanted the and or assigns language in there. But what your REPC says is that if you do use the and or assigns language, that it is only a reference to those permissible assignments. So it really takes away the ability to assign in any form other than one of those two limited circumstances for the assignment. So, okay, does anybody have any questions about any of that? So, has anybody done an assignment, say, in the last 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months? No. All right. But those are the general rules for assignments. So let's talk about flips then. Well, let's kind of get into this. Let's get into this idea of wholesaling. So does anybody feel like they have a pretty good handle on what I'm talking about with wholesalers and would like to take a stab at describing it? Nobody? Cindy, I know you're new. You know what wholesalers are? You know what we're talking about? Well, there are groups of people or individuals who are not licensed real estate agents, who through various methods, they research the probate records with the counties. They research obituaries, believe it or not, evictions. So they access the evictions, and they certainly use the notices of default, right? The NODs. So they use all of these. They use all of these resources to identify people who might be amenable to fast cash offer on their properties. And most of these properties are a little rundown. Let's say that they are not your A+ properties. They're in need of rehab, a lot of them. And also, they are in need of some sort of curative legal action. So mom has died and she left this little house and it's got a reverse mortgage on it, and family doesn't know what to do with it and they don't really care about it. And so this wholesaler will go in and say, and they will say, well, we'll fix your legal issues, right? We'll hire a lawyer to do a probate, or we'll pay for a guardianship, but we will, or whatever it takes, you know, to cure a default, maybe if the property is close to a foreclosure, but we want to buy your property. And it's surprisingly attractive to a number of sellers, right? Because there's no appraisals involved in it. There's no financing, so there's not going to be any FHA or VA requirements. They don't have to fix up the property. Property is going to be sold in as-is condition, and you know, depending on the circumstances, they might get a free probate out of it, or a free guardianship out of it. And so it's attractive to a surprising number of people who are just ready to get rid of the property. And these wholesalers buy these properties at significantly reduced prices, and then they sell those contracts to either individuals or to groups of investors. And like I said, they sell them for a lot of money. And then those investors fix up the properties and they flip them and they sell them, or they keep them as rentals, you know, in a inventory. And so these wholesalers are not licensed real estate agents. They do not use any of the state forms. They are not required to use any of the state forms because they're not real estate licensees. And they are not acting in a representational capacity. So they're not regulated by, you know, the insurance or the real estate division, or by any body at the, well, they're just simply not regulated. And the practice, you know, depending on your experience with it, it's completely legal, right? There's nothing illegal. There is, I have seen, you know, the opportunity to overreach and to maybe make some misrepresentations and to prey a little bit on elderly people. I've certainly seen that. And last time I taught this class, there was somebody in the class that had not a very pleasant experience with wholesalers, because these wholesalers could not find anybody to assign their contracts to. And so they just walked away from the deal. And she said she had a house where there were two wholesalers who put it under contract, couldn't find anybody to assign it to. And so they just left. They walked away. I don't think that's a very honorable practice personally. I think if you put a property under contract and you can't assign it, you probably have an obligation to buy it and to turn it into a flip. But I know that there are plenty of people that would disagree with that. But I think that is kind of a creepy practice, to put a property under contract and not have any skin in the game whatsoever. You know, if nobody will buy my contract, then I just get to walk away. Now, if I'm willing to forfeit the earnest money and my seller is okay with that, you know, that's another deal. But I certainly have never seen anybody put that as a condition into a contract, right? I'm obligating myself as a buyer on a contract, but I'm conditioning my performance on my ability to sell this contract. I would think that a layperson, having read that and kind of thinking through the repercussion of that, would not want to do business with that buyer. But that's just my personal opinion. Now, know this, okay? And Steve, you correct me if I'm wrong. If you, as licensed real estate agents, are a party to a transaction, you're either a seller or a buyer in a transaction. Let's say you're doing some of this wholesaling or you're doing some of these flips. You are not required to use the state forms. You can use whatever forms you want. And the real estate licensees that we've seen use both forms. So they will sometimes use the state form, especially when they intend to actually buy the property and not assign it. Or if they are going to assign it, then they will use their own contract, you know, one that's prepared by an attorney. So as a real estate licensee, when you're a party to a transaction, you do not have an obligation to use the state's forms. You do, however, have to disclose the status of your license, right? When you're a principal to a transaction, you have to disclose that you're a licensee, and you have to disclose the status of your license. And, you know, if you ever get into a scenario where you have a question of what you should disclose or not, Steve will tell you, and I will tell you, over disclose. Disclose, 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 right?
Mark, I agree with everything you've said. If you're the principal, you know, you don't have to, and you don't have to run it through your brokerage. But then you don't have the protection of your brokerage or the protection of your E&O insurance.
Right.
In that case.
Yeah, you're kind of on your own. Yeah. I had a question come up to me. Well, if you get compensation, if you're a real estate licensee and you get compensation for assignment of a contract, does that have to run through your brokerage? Is that some form of a commission and have to run through your brokerage? And my guess is the answer would be no, just because of what we talked about. It's not really a brokerage matter. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You don't have to run it through if you're the principal.
Yeah. Now, there has been some suggestion. Uh-oh, time for a letter. Everybody got it? There has been a suggestion that maybe these wholesalers ought to be regulated. There isn't any that I'm aware of any discussion at the department level of regulating these wholesalers. I think the market is just kind of wide open. You know, obviously there's such a thing as fraud and undue influence and those things, but it's not it's not something that's regulated. I guess you could sort of make an argument in a way that in a certain circumstance that a wholesaler was acting as in a representational capacity. So if I'm acting in a representational capacity, so if somebody has hired me specifically to go out and make an offer on a certain property so that they can acquire it, maybe now I'm acting like a real estate agent, and I may be doing some unauthorized practice of real estate. But as long as you're acting on your own as a principal, as either a buyer or a seller, sky's the limit. The contracts that you use are pretty wide open, and most of these wholesaler contracts will make it pretty clear that my intention is to sell this contract and to assign this contract. So, does anybody have any questions up to there on this whole practice? And we're not talking about a handful of properties. You're talking hundreds of properties that are sold by wholesalers, and it is a group of sellers that it's easy to ignore. As real estate licensees, it's maybe easy to ignore, but consider maybe using some of the same things that wholesalers use to try to get some of these properties listed and make a little money on them. Definitely the NODs. We can give you the NODs all day long. They're easy to get your hands on. Not a lot of NODs right now, but is anybody aware of what's going to happen on March 31st of this year? It's the moratorium on foreclosures will expire unless it's extended. Originally, the moratorium on foreclosures was the end of January, but then President Biden extended it until March 31st. And so if that's not extended again, you're probably going to see an increase in foreclosures and distressed properties. So, NOD means a notice of default. Notice of default. That's the start of a foreclosure action. So, okay, let me hit some of these forms really quickly. We're running out of time, and I'm glad to be able to refresh your memory on these forms. Form number 28 is, and I'll go through this quickly and kind of give you an idea of what most of these addendums do. Form number 28 is an assignment of new construction. So if I've put a new construction property under contract and I want to assign that contract, form number 28 is an addendum that I would use. And obviously, as an addendum, that's going to be a consensual assignment. So the seller is going to sign that and acknowledge that the buyer is being substituted. And if you were to think through all of the ramifications of assigning a construction contract, it's all in that form. What do we do with deposits? What do we do with change orders? What do we do with earnest money or money that's been paid down? Who once the assignment is done, who has the ability to contact the builder? Is it buyer number one? Is it buyer number two? And what are the seller's responsibilities and the buyer's respective responsibilities? It's all spelled out in that addendum. And the other thing, and this is common to the other addendums as well on assignments, one thing to remember is that if I am the assignee, I don't get anything different than what the original buyer was entitled to. So I don't get a new due diligence period. I don't get any more seller disclosures. I don't get an extension of my closing date. Everything that the first buyer had in place, I now have in place as well. His earnest money or her earnest money becomes my earnest money. And the seller has no recourse. So if the seller has agreed to the assignment, the seller has no recourse to the original buyer. The seller's recourse is to the new buyer. So if there is a default, for instance, and the seller wants to hold somebody responsible for the default, it's not the first buyer, right? The first buyer has been substituted by the second buyer. So it is the second buyer, and the first buyer is out of the picture. So now, one of the other addendums, it's kind of a funky one, and you'll probably go through your entire career and never see one of these. It's a simultaneous close addendum. Simultaneous close addendum. And so in the simultaneous close, seller sells to B, and then B turns around and sells to B2, right? B1 becomes a seller and closes to B2. And there's no delay. It happens at the same time. What the insurance division has told title companies is that for us to close this transaction, we cannot close it as a single transaction. We have to close it as two transactions. And so this first transaction has to close, and it has to fund, and there has to be title insurance issued. And then the second transaction has to close, and it has to fund, and title insurance has to be issued for that transaction as well. Now, the reason why that's maybe not made some investors very happy is because if you're B1, right, what you would really like to have happen is for buyer number two's money to fund the purchase of the property from the seller, so that buyer number two doesn't have to expose any of their own funds or come up with the money to buy it. So if you're buyer number one, that's exactly what you want to have happen. And the other thing that you don't want to have to do is you don't want to have to pay for title insurance for buyer number two. You want the seller to buy title insurance for buyer number two. So you want to pass through the money and you want to pass through the title insurance. But that's against the rules. So that's the flop portion of this class. Title companies cannot close it as a single transaction. We have to close that one. It's got to fund, and we have to issue policy, and then that one needs to fund, and we have to issue policy on that as well. So you cannot integrate those two transactions. Does anybody have any questions? I probably see maybe one of those a year or two of those a year where people want to do it that way, and we have to say, no, you gotta come up with some money and pay the seller, or or we can't close it. So does anybody have any questions, experiences with that?
I put a question into the chat. I'm just wondering why someone would do that instead of doing an assignment.
Because the seller won't agree to it. So, you'd like to do the assignment. It's much cleaner and much easier. But if the seller won't agree to it, but you've got a buyer on the line, then you do the simultaneous close.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and again, it raises some issues. If I'm buyer number, if I'm doing a simultaneous close, do I have to disclose to the seller that I'm flipping it? If you use the state's form, all of those disclosures are taken care of because it's an addendum. Everybody signs it, right? And then you have another contract underneath. And if you're buyer number one, and you're a real estate agent and you're going to do a flip, go back to the old rule: disclose, disclose, disclose. You've got to get your disclosure in place. At the very end of this outline, if you're interested in looking at it, I've got a case. There's a case in there involving the Haas companies, which was a real estate brokerage many years ago. And these agents from the Haas companies were doing some flips and they didn't disclose what they were doing, and they got sued and lost pretty badly. In fact, one of them had some punitive damages against him for $1.5 million because the judge said, yeah, you should have disclosed it. You've got some superior knowledge on this and you should have disclosed to everybody who you were, and really dinged him on it. So got to be kind of careful. Last thing I'll go through and then I'll be done is how the fee is paid. So what, as a title company, what we would like to see is the seller, so buyer number one and buyer number two, we'd like to see them conduct their business outside of the closing. So if it's a $65,000 assignment fee, we'd like to see B2 and B1 work that out on their own, so that all we see at the closing is the original contract plus an assignment. We've got the seller, we've got the buyer, and we don't have to collect that fee. In a perfect world, that's the way that it would work, but it doesn't actually work that way. So in reality, what happens is that the title company collects that fee at the closing and pays B1 the assignment fee. So there are some title companies that will not close that transaction, but I personally don't see a problem with it. And until somebody tells me otherwise, I don't have a problem with closing that. And we close quite a few of those. So, okay, I think we got one last letter.
B.
The letter is B. Questions? Comments? Everybody still awake?
I have a question.
Okay.
Are there any restrictions on a real estate agent becoming a wholesaler?
No. No, we've got several wholesaler clients that are also licensed agents. Now,
So here's
Steve,
the thing.
you know,
Real
Steve
quick.
Steve might have a different policy or a different attitude about that, but
Yeah. So one of the issues that's been coming up lately that we had Curtis do his legal thing on yesterday, and I copied it and put it in our page, is we have, if you're going to wholesale, right? That's just what it's called, or it's do the assignment. It's typically where you already have buyers lined up. What we're seeing right now is people are getting those contracts locked in, even if it is with a builder, but they don't have the buyer yet. And so they're looking to try to market the property instead of marketing the contract. And so that's where we're running into certain technical issues of, are you allowed to market the property? Well, you are if you have the seller's written permission.
yeah.
But typically it's marketing the contract, which is tied to the property. And so
Right.
these are the real technical things that we're running into this week even.
Yeah, I would be really interested to hear what Curtis had to say about that. That does seem to be a distinction, marketing the contract or marketing the property. Yeah, absolutely. So, because if you're marketing the property, I would think that would put you into maybe the category of a representation of some sort, which would require a license. What else, Steve? What else did he have to say?
So we were talking about how you don't have equitable title as buyer number one to represent the property. And so you cannot put it on the MLS because, especially if it's on the MLS already in an under contract position. I text Brad Belke to get his take on it. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Our policy is you cannot even list it on the MLS, even with the seller's permission, if it's already on the MLS and you do not own title to it. So even if it's not on the MLS, but buyer number one doesn't own any title to it or any rights to the title, then it's against the MLS policy to market it on the MLS.
You know, and that I'd have to go back and look at it. I think that's, and I won't even call it a recent change because I remember years ago that there were there were contracts on the MLS and also options on the MLS. And so I think the better thinking is that you don't have the right to put it on the MLS because you don't own it in the way that would require you to represent yourself as a seller. So Steve, is the MLS got a prohibition on options as well? Can you list options for sale?
No, you can't. Brad said you can't do that. So
Yeah, you used to be able to see contracts and options on the MLS. So yeah, I think the better thinking is not to be able to market those things. And most of these wholesalers who are in it in any kind of, to any large extent, they're working with investor groups. So there's just a lot of different investor groups who they go to with their contracts. And so, yeah, they've already got a pretty ready group of buyers to acquire these contracts. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Where the division doesn't like it is where the wholesaler is, like Mark said, acting in the capacity of a licensed realtor. That's where the division will ding them, and they look for that. The division does not like wholesaling, but it is legal, so they're watching wholesalers closely.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, not to belabor the point, but it's certainly possible to see some real abuses. Most of these wholesalers, or not, I don't know, most of them, several of them will put an NOI, a notice of interest, on the property once they put it under contract, just to kind of tie up the seller. So if I've encumbered your property with an NOI and for some reason I don't sell the property, or I don't feel like I've been fairly treated, and I keep your property encumbered with an NOI, that's a problem, right? Now you've created a problem for the seller being able to market that property to another buyer. So I really don't care for that practice of putting an NOI on a property. So, that's just one of the things that I see that I think probably ought to be maybe, looked at. But okay, well, thanks, guys. I think our hour's up. Maybe went over a little bit.
Derry asked, what is the form number for that addendum?
Oh, 28, 29, and 30.
Okay.
28 is the assignment of new construction. 29 is the assignment of interest for existing residential. And 30 is the simultaneous closing addendum.
Okay, so wonderful. Well,
hey,
thanks.
did you guys
Derry.
did you get the outline? Did everybody get the outline?
They should have. If you did not, you can just let me know. I can email it to you when you email me back your license number. But I did send it to Leslie last night, so.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Steve, for having us.
Yeah, I love that it's a topic that's so relevant right now. Thank you so much for being here with us and putting this on. And we really appreciate all you guys. And it's good to see some of these faces. Steve Theobald, haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Thanks, guys, for attending. Have a great day and be safe out there.